I want to ask a question that actually Dr. Kim is curious about, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, and now that I'm thinking about it, it's a really good question. I'd kind of like your guys' perspective on it, and that is why do we think addiction doesn't fall under commitment laws in Illinois, similar to like homicide, where if somebody's homicidal or suicidal, a doctor or a therapist or a family member, can commit them to like an inpatient unit. With addiction, and Shale can maybe talk about this a little bit more from the clinical standpoint, or Chelsea as well. I mean, this is a disease of resistance, at the very least in many cases. I mean, we've talked a lot about people who are ready to get into treatment. There's also a lot of people who are basically killing themselves as their family members watch, particularly anyone 18 and above, and there's just nothing they can do. So I'm kind of wondering, has anyone ever thought about there being like a commitment law for addiction?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I can tell you from our standpoint, it would be, I mean, we have people leaving treatment every day, and it's really a shame because they shouldn't be leaving.
Well, one of the laws that I've spent a lot of time researching is called the Marchman Act. It's a law based in Florida where if you can prove that that person, in a very finite amount of time, has a substance use disorder, the court will reprimand them, and they will take them, and they will give them the option of treatment or jail. And so in Florida, where there's thousands of treatment centers, right, albeit maybe not doing the best work, sorry, but that's just my experience. I'm not going to stand up here and BS you guys. We do have a lot of problems with offering people evidence-based treatment. We do. And Florida is not innocent from that, or practices. You can do that, right? Because, and people literally will fly their children to Florida or get them in a situation where they will end up in Florida just to Marchman Act them. There are lawyers who specialize in the Marchman Act. That's all they do. Marchman Act and Baker Act law. Seriously, Baker Act is like our commitment, mental health commitment law.
What do you have to show to be able to,
I'm
get
not
that kind of reaction?
100% sure, but I've had to do it to someone. I've had to do this with a loved one before. And unless you really do have to prove that this person has been a harm to themselves or another person in their life, because it didn't hold up in court the way that we did this one case, and I won't get into the nuances of it, but there's two sides of me, in the social work space. There's kind of the side of ethics of, is this right to commit somebody who has a mental health disorder against their will? Will it cause this person maybe to retaliate? Will they ever talk to me again? Will this make it worse? There's that, of course, there's that fear no matter what. But the other side is, will this keep this person safe? Will this person be able to be okay at the end of the day? And so it's a really fine line to walk when you're, no matter who you are in the clinical field or legal profession, because there's a risk no matter what. But at the end of the day, it only works well, I think, when you have the infrastructure in the system in order to make it work well. In Illinois, we don't have a very robust treatment system. I don't have to explain that to anyone in this room. Treatment is a commodity. It really is. If you can be able to get treatment, you are a lucky person. 10% of people who want it don't get it. That's a huge problem, and it's a whole other human rights issue in my mind. But if the Marchman Act were to work here, it would have to be potentially done to accommodate for our culture, which is much different than maybe in the culture in Florida, and it couldn't be just duplicated the same way. But I do believe it should be considered for high-risk cases, based on my analysis and I do have a colleague down there, Joe Considine, who is, all he does is Marchman Act law, and he sees thousands and thousands of cases a year. Do they turn out to be successful? Probably some, probably not others, just like here, just like we haven't perfected treatment for addiction and mental health yet, we have not perfected it, but it's something that is an option for people.
But you talk about evidence-based. What does the evidence show in terms of it being good or not being good.
So that's an interesting question, because how do you define success with substance use disorder in general? Do you define it like we're talking about with harm reduction, where if you didn't use a bag that weekend, that's a success for you? Or do you define it as sober for a certain amount of time? And if you have a relapse, does that mean it's not successful? So I think that the nuances of outcomes data, who's doing the data, what the data consists of, is it biased data, is it not biased data? We still don't have a perfect data and research system around outcomes for substance use disorders, because we have only just, up until recently, decided that, for better, I think, that we can't just define it based on sober or not sober, if that makes sense.
But if we're telling this crowd here, you've all become activists and we want you to go out and advocate for something like this, you have to give us evidence to.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, not you,
Yeah.
but there has to be evidence for us to then argue and activate for something we believe in.
Great point. And there isn't. We don't have evidence. We have evidence that treatment works. We have evidence that it can work. We have evidence of what we know needs to be happening to make that work for someone. But it's such an imperfect, as you know, system.
And treatment is not necessarily the same as commitment. So-
Right.
So do we know that commitment works? I don't know.
What works what they do in Florida is they give you the option of either treatment or jail. So that's really the two options for you in that scenario. That's how it works there. And so I think it would have to look differently here in order to make sense. I just don't know what that looks like. I don't have the answer.
And
I don't
Tanya,
Yeah,
to your
I don't
point,
think anybody does.
when you were talking earlier about, sometimes you'll, have no choice, you'll feel you have no choice but to send someone to jail because they're out of control. Can you imagine if you could send, you had the authority to send someone to treatment instead of jail, in
And
order to
actually,
keep them safe?
when I do get someone into custody, that's exactly what I'm aiming to do. They might be in custody, but only till I can get them into a treatment center. So it's not like jail and that's going to solve the problem. No, I get them into custody just so I know that they're going to be alive that night, and then do the referrals, the necessary referrals to the treatment centers that can adequately help that person. That's always the goal. So this conversation about Marchman Act and stuff, I guess I kind of feel lucky because I do have that, I can say, you got to come to court. We're going across the street. And hopefully most judges, if I'm particularly with Judge Stride or judges that are more aware of the issue and the stuff around it, like, they will remand someone, which is a blessing for me, because when I'm dealing with someone who can potentially die that night, and that's how I look at it, and if they're actively using heroin, that's a blessing to me, to be able to put them somewhere that I know they're going to be safe. They might not like it, but at least it's somewhere where I know they're not going to be able to use, and then I can do whatever I can to refer them to treatment and know that they're going to be clean.
I've also done that with my patient's probation officer. Because I think in certain cases, she's right.
It's better than...
But you're talking about a family going in and saying, I want my
Correct.
ex to
Not-
be involuntarily committed, the way that the city used to do for like tuberculosis people.
Or the way we do now for someone who's suicidal.
Right.
Or homicidal.
And I think that's going to be a law change that's going to be
Yeah.
required.
My question is with this Marchman Act, is it very consistent? Like you go into, because you know about it, I don't, 30, you either go into treatment or you go to jail. Is it the same standard for every patient? Like you do 30 days of treatment or 30 days of jail? Or is there
I don't know.
flexibility with that as far as, what
I would
The needs
I
of
would
the
gather that
person
the court would be doing this alongside the treatment program to make their final decision. I'm sorry that I don't have that information. But
Because I'm thinking this 30-day, it just doesn't work. I mean, they need to be in a whole lot longer. It has to be a 6-month to a year thing to get all the kinks worked out, get their brains functioning again. From my perspective, from what.
yeah.
Absolutely.
From my own personal experience, and I'm definitely not a doctor or an expert, particularly as it relates to the science around addiction, but, I have friends who have passed away, have friends who have successfully used Matt, and I'm convinced that they're alive simply because of it, or that there's people I know who passed away because they didn't have that option available to them. I think with addiction, you're sort of it's sort of a somewhat different beast than, you know, a manic suicidal episode that may pass by getting them into, you know, that padded room, so to speak, so they can't harm themselves. And with addiction, you're more dealing with this, you can lead a horse to water conundrum. And until you're ready to go and say, I'm done with this, you know, your family can, you know, have those guys come and throw you into a van and take you over to treatment. If you're like, screw this, I don't have a problem, or I want to just go have fun, or I don't care if I die, or whatever your, you know, throw it over to, you know, toss it up to the wind view of it is, you're probably going to go out and relapse. And so, you know, for me, the question is, what do we need to arm the people with addiction so they can come to the conclusion that they need the help and then get in there? But I definitely think, you know, you're on a tear, and you know, a lot of heroin was found in your possession or something by your family. At least get them away from it and potentially into like a 3-day treatment or something like that. I do think that those kinds of, you know, that would be like the corollary to a suicidal, you know, episode where, you know, that may pass. That, you know, maybe you had some kind of very stressful thing happen. You had you're going through a divorce or something like that. If anything's going to want to make you, you know, potentially use drugs, you know, as a you know, means of, you know, alleviating those pains.
But
you can
divorces last more than 3 days.
No. What I'm saying is that that is for darn sure. You know, that manic episode, whatever the impetus of that stressor was, maybe that could pass. I don't know. It's a tough situation where you got to really want it to get better. It's tough for
I
loved
think
ones.
it boils down to the question of what can family members and loved ones do as they're watching, you know, their loved one, you know, slowly die.
It's an insurance money issue. There's a federal statute called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, commonly known as EMTALA, enacted in 1986 under the Reagan administration, made part of the most of us know it, especially in the divorce division, as COBRA. There's a provision in EMTALA that basically says, and I'll make it in Cliff Notes version, if an individual comes into an emergency room facility with either no insurance or substandard insurance, the emergency room has to stabilize their condition. So then the question is, what does stabilization mean? And I'm an attorney, I know the judge, I know Chelsea. The issue is, what is stabilization? There are probably thousands of heroin overdose cases in this country every year, every day, where an individual goes into an emergency room, they had the naloxone saved. They go into the ER room, they check their eyes, probably don't give them a blood test, you know, observe them, you know, they're tired and this and that. And they go, but they had the naloxone saved, they watch them for an hour, hour and a half, boom, release them because their condition is stabilized. Chelsea's forgot more about this subject than I'll ever know, but clearly what I have learned is that the Narcan save is just the beginning of recovery. It's not the end. Therefore, the condition is not stabilized. Therefore, the releases of all these individuals, it's tantamount, in my opinion, to a death sentence. And it's killing thousands of young people across this country on a daily basis, and I'm going to figure it out.
Well, let's figure it out.
Please do.
That sounds great.
Because we have Marchman, it's right there in EMTALA, but nobody is going to, people are afraid to go after big insurance, big hospitals. It's a David Goliath deal, and that's the thing, okay? And we have, and there's also, what is it called, Robert's Law out of Florida? There's another law in
State.
Florida, right? Robert?
Every state has a different
Yeah,
kind
I
of
thought
version.
There's a
of
couple,
what we're
I've
talking about.
researched it, and really EMTALA sets it up that they can't, if someone is there and they have the naloxone saved, they're high risk. Even if they went through the withdrawal, and that's a whole nother issue of, I've had clients, the old thing is, if someone is in police custody and they have a heart attack, they're taken to a hospital. If someone is in police custody and has a stroke, they're taken to the hospital. But if someone is there going through withdrawal, they give them a couple blankets and let them sweat it out. I mean, it's craziness. Lake County, through the Lake County Opiate Initiative, it's changed. But you have to get someone who acknowledges they have a disease, and then the system will work. It's hard once they're taken in.
So is this law poorly written, or is it poorly implemented?
I think it's big money, and in other words, they're gonna, and I've examined discharge reports. They say there's boilerplate language that, and I've seen this in discharge reports in 3 states, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Ohio. And by the way, if you use again, you'll die. Now, somebody's got it, it's a cover your ass scenario that these hospitals are programmed or trained to put in their discharge papers. Of course they're gonna die. They're, in my opinion, from what I know about it, they're gonna, likely, if someone is saved and they're gonna crave, they're gonna use, they're gonna die. And that'll be within 5 hours of release. So I believe that there already is a Marchman's Law in our state. It's governed by the federal government under EMTALA. But to get somebody to do something about it, and I'm gonna do it myself.
And is it not being done because it's not a sympathetic plaintiff, like for a class
Is
action?
These hospitals, and I understand, they are so inundated, they get hundreds of these people taken off. One person was taken off a CTA bus, saved by Chicago Fire Department by a naloxone injection, released, and then died.
Happens every day.
Every day,
Many
multiple
times a
times,
day.
thousands of times. And there is this law, so we need some sort of a definition, what is stabilized. I don't believe that the naloxone save means they're stabilized. I just don't. It's a miracle medication. Thank God that it's out there.
But what I'm hearing is that it should be the physicians, or certainly you go to the physicians, go to the medical disciplinary board, go to Dr. Brian Zachariah, who heads up the board, he's a staff person for the agency, and he sends out newsletters, go to the medical association, Illinois Medical Association.
You gotta get somebody who's gonna say that, I agree. I mean, I think it's a no-brainer.
But these are people who can make a difference and can reach out to the physicians and give them knowledge that they don't have.
So
or
the
they choose
Illinois
to
Hospital
ignore.
Association has been working on this for several years. I know that because I've been working on it with them. And one of the things that they are not willing to do yet, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of them, I will just tell you what I've gleaned, is that they don't have the infrastructure, they aren't willing to fund it. Sorry, but they're not. And they believe, and I get this, again, not them, just from what I've interpreted, that outside of the hospital setting, once that person has been medicated or whatever we're gonna do with them beyond stabilization, that there aren't services in the community that can help them beyond that, which they're not wrong about. But is it worth it just based on that limited scope to say, no, we shouldn't pursue full hospital emergency department reform when it comes to this? No, I don't think so.
I mean, because the penalty for an EMTALA violation is that a hospital cannot then bill Medicaid, Medicare patients. That's the statutory penalty.
Have you seen the law in any state be, a case brought for the law not being followed in the way that you think it needs to be?
Well, there was an EMTALA case filed by Mr. Powers, Rogers and Smith down in the law division, but it wasn't it was a different kind of a matter, and I spoke with Mr. Powers himself about it, and it was against Cook County Hospital, which has special immunities, and it did deal with opiates, but it was dismissed after five amended complaints, and that was affirmed by the First District Appellate Court. There isn't a lot of EMTALA litigation out there, but I think that it's an interesting argument, but surely would be met with substantial resistance and big money. Because there's millions of dollars at stake if you take down a hospital who's, especially an inner city type hospital, they can't collect Medicare and Medicaid. It's about dollars.
But understanding their exposure and potential liability, that's
I
all the
agree.
more reason to bring it.
Well, I've looked for co-counsel and I've been turned down by 5 very high-profile injury lawyers, so I'm going to do it myself.
Maybe you might get some help from some people up here with that, I don't know.
Maybe, but I doubt it.
Well, I'll say this, I mean, I think one of the things I've heard
I
this whole
can't help.
evening is, you can't help, right?
It's an
But
interesting
you
theory.
might
I
have
want
somebody
somebody,
in front.
somebody
To
needs,
recommend somebody.
somebody needs to do but there's a way. But again, I see the hospital's point of view. I mean, there's so many of they wouldn't know what to do. They just wouldn't.
No, that's not true. So
then
we
okay,
have hospital toolkits.
Yeah.
There are certainly hospitals in this country that have implemented successful, operating, correct, best practice policies regarding this.
Standards of care.
Standards of care that, that I think are evolving. So Addiction Policy Forum, for example, has put together an entire hospital toolkit that recommends to hospital systems exactly how they can be better serving people in these situations. It would probably be way less costly to go that route, and you would be, you'd be hoping that the hospital would be willing to do it. But at least here in Lake County or in Cook County locally, that's some advocacy work that we can try and pursue because it's right there and we have efficacy data around it. There are models in other states. Illinois is not that great. There are models in other states that have done this well, and they don't have nearly as many overdose deaths and deaths post-release from a hospital as we see here in Illinois and in other states like West Virginia who have high overdose
I
rates.
mean, there's so many issues here legally. I mean, is Sheridan still the only IDOC facility with help for
Drug treatment.
use dispense?
I believe so.
I mean, why can't we just as a system, I mean, you got this Supermax TAMS that was closed down 5-10 years ago.
Right.
Why don't you use that facility? I mean, I don't get it, but I guess I do.
We should have invited the governor.
Right. Why, next time.